video, a very short deck profile. I did make top 8 at first pro class I went to, so I wanted to talk about it. And what matchups I had and all that fun stuff. So, for week 1, I decided to bring Bravo, star of the show. Not really because I stick with the meta. I don't really stick with the meta, but right when, at the height of Briar, I actually bought all the Guardian stuff, and traded in some things for it. So, when Star of the Show came along, I was like, well, I have all this stuff already. The only thing I don't have is Stalagmite, which I'm debating whether I should get that or not. But I have everything else for Bravo other than Stalagmite. So let's start, I guess, with the deck, and then we'll talk about the matchups. And it should be pretty short because I didn't change a whole lot between rounds. I had some pretty interesting games I wasn't expecting to play. So let's go in this visual format so it's a little bit easier to see. So as far as our equipment, standard equipment, pretty straightforward. Most people run a very similar standard equipment set. So you got Winter's Wail, Crater Fist, Crown of Seeds, Tunic. I choose Ironhide Legs, and this is a personal preference, I think, more than anything. Some people go Mage Master Boots. I like the Ironhide Legs, and I'm actually thinking in some matchups I may like No Rune better based on my loss that I had. So these boots are kind of open to interpretation. If you want to run Tome of Findo, that combo, you obviously run Mage Master Boots, and you can take up another slot and add those in. But I chose not to. I just didn't like the combo. I didn't think it flowed very well for the way I like to play the deck. So we'll run through real quick all the card choices and why they are what they are. So after playtesting, I played the Battle Hardened list at my locals on the Saturday, and I just didn't like it. There were some things I didn't like about it. One, there was too many 2-blocks. So you're going to have a bunch of 2-blocks because you have to play all these elemental cards. So I decided to take out, they had like some evergreens and some other break grounds and things like that. They had different colored break grounds in here. So I took those out. I took out the blue break grounds for yellow Autumn's Touches. I took out the Frostfang yellows for reds because I feel like the yellows just don't do anything unless you're running Pummel. If you run Pummel, then you can go ahead and run yellow, which I may do in the future. But as of now, I kind of like red better just because it's 5, it demands a 2-card block, or they lose a card anyway. So, most people are going to put a card in equipment, and it kind of burns through their equipment over time. The other thing I did was I went down on the one evergreen that was in here and added a 3rd Entangle. This is just a solid attack. Reduces the damage coming at you. A lot of times your games are going to be damage races anyway, so unless you're playing it's like Oldham or something, it's going to be a damage race. So Entangle is a good way to swing it a little bit in your favor. It's even just at -2. A lot of my opponents would just pass and not do anything, even with the -2 out. So, worked out pretty well. We have only 2 Crippling Crushes. They're just too expensive to pay for normally, so you really don't want to pay for it out of hand unless you have the fuse and, maybe a Tunic counter. If you have a Tunic counter, it's 7, right? But it's only 2 blues. But ideally, you don't want too many Crippling Crushes. You see them too often, you'll not be able to play them, and that's not good. 3 Oakenolds, pretty straightforward. This is all about hand disruption. So you got your hand disruption from Crippling, hand disruption from Oaken. You've got your pulses, 3 pulses, pretty standard. We have 2 Pulverize. You never really want to play Pulverize outright. I played it maybe once outright in the entire set of games that I played. You really don't want to have to play it outright. You want to play it off of an Awakening, and I'll talk about that when we talk about matchups. 2 Spinals to stop go again. And it's just an annoying, number. So, it's 9, so they have to block at least 6. Even if it's not dominated. And then, of course, if you get the Bravo effect, you get an additional +2, making an 11. That's really annoying to block. So then they have to block 8. It's basically like a regular Crippling Crush with Dominate. if they want to block this and stop and get the go again. Now, I ran 3 staunch responses in my testing. I was going to run steadfast, but just for this deck and the resource curve you're working with, paying 2 and having 1 floating for crown or shield, just way too valuable. So this is the only defense reaction we have. I opted for 3 Awakening because, like I said, when you're behind or you let yourself go behind, there's a lot of turns where I let myself go behind on purpose to play an Awakening and then swing back with a Pulverize for 14. So you can swing tempo back in your favor if you start losing it. There's a few games where I did start losing tempo a little bit, and I was like, well, if I'm going to lose tempo anyway, I'm going to not block, take some damage. And then when it comes back to me, I'm going to swing Pulverize. If any damage gets through, or even if they block it all out, they have no hand, they're not swinging into me again. I get a free turn off to swing back into them, even if I'm just coming in with like an Autumn Touch for 9 next turn, or Autumn Touch for 8. It's still a relevant thing to get the tempo back in your favor. And all the blues are pretty standard. We got blinks because you got to run them. They're good for the Prism matchup. They're good in general. They're actually good. I played a few turns where I would play a blink. I played like a 6, maybe like a 5 attack like this into a blink, into a hammer swing. So a lot of that going on. Same thing with Flash. Flash is the same thing. If you can set it up where you can play the Flash, from Arsenal, you can go Flash, give something, go again, and then swing the hammer afterwards. What you really want to do with this deck, and I'll explain that a little bit, I guess, is you want to go as wide as you can on turns where you have the option to. So you're either going really big and fusing, or using Bravo's ability, or you're going as wide as you can. You're going like 2 attacks wide as many times as possible in the game. So I have a bunch of lightning cards here, so I chose to do Heaven's Claws and Lightning Surge. I also switched out my Winter's Bite for icy encounters. And the reason I did that is because of Art of War. So Art of War, you have to banish an attack action. So it just gives me another attack action to play with. Polar Blast is kind of an open slot. You could change it to something else. I think Winter's Bite is probably a better card because it forces the 1 cost out of hand. So if I were to play the deck again, I would probably change these 2 Polar Blast into Winter's Bites. And we'll see. I don't know if I'm going to play the same deck next weekend, but if I do, I have some tweaks that I want to make to it. Then you have Winter's Grasp. Of course, it's just a blue. It's an ice card. It also is an attack action, so that when you play your Art of Wars, you can banish it if you're missing an element. So a lot of times what I would do is I would play Art of War, but I wouldn't even use the effects, really. I would just use it for the draw. So I'm not really worried about, because you can float a blue, banish an attack that you have a duplicate of. So maybe I have like 2 of these lightning cards. I could banish one of these, maybe pitching like an ice card or something, and maybe I had a pulse in hand, and I'm looking for like an attack, or I'm looking for like the other element, right? So a lot of times I would play Art of War on my opponent's turn, and I wouldn't even use the effect. I wouldn't block with the extra block. I would declare it just in case I needed it, but sometimes I wouldn't even. There was a turn I remember playing 2 Art of Wars just to draw cards, and that was it. I just took all the damage on the turn and just drew cards to get Bravo's ability off. So this deck is very reliant, or at least the way I'm playing it, is very heavily reliant upon triggering this ability on Bravo as many times as possible in a game, and you just demoralize your opponent when you have so many attacks coming at them that disrupt their hand, destroy their hand, they can't play the game. So for me, that's not a fun play style, but I mean, it got me to top 8, so it is what it is. It's not as bad as playing against Briar or anything like that from the previous metas, Briar or Chain, just because they had so many attacks. You can't block 12 cards with your 4-card hand, for an average deck. There's a lot of decks that cannot defend against that. And you're just playing a bleeding, life game at that point. But anyway. Sideboarded items, we have Arcane Lantern, obviously, for any Kanos out there. Heart of Ice, mostly for Kano. I don't know. I didn't side it in against anybody because I didn't play against any by dealing arcane. The only thing I would have sided in was the no rune boots, and I did that for the Viserai matchup. And I probably needed to do that for the Prism matchup that I played, and I'll talk about that when we get there. Shock Charmers, that's also for me. I think Shock Charmers is exclusively for Kano, because if you are playing against Kano, you want to race them down as quickly as possible and not give them a chance to ever set up. So if you play Shock Charmers and you got all these extra blues in hand, you can start pitching to Shock Charmers, stack some damage as high as possible when you know Kano's not going to really do you anything back. Maybe they blocked, or maybe they put 2 cards in front of your giant attack. You can go ahead and Shock Charmers with the extra resources that you end up with. Because when you play an Oak and Old and you reveal 2 blue cards, that's 6 resources. That's 3 extra damage you can bleed. And 3 damage on Kano is 10% of his life. So if you ever do play a Kano, the Shock Charmers are probably coming in. I never felt the need to use any of these sideboard cards. Honestly, I would probably cut my exposed to the elements. It just didn't do anything for me all day. I think it's good for the Oldham matchup or like the mirror match. I played no mirrors all day, so I mean, I guess it's kind of fortunate on me to just get lucky enough to not play the mirror. But expose the elements. I'm still on the fence about it. I'm thinking about swapping it to something else, something more practical. And then Remembrance, I don't know if the games are ever going to go that long because of my playstyle. So when I play this deck, I take a lot of damage, and I play like a very back and forth game. So like I will take 8, and then I will swing back for 9 dominated, and then I will like Oak and Old fused. Then I will, swing like a 9 dominated. So I'm coming at you multiple ways. I'm trying to deal more damage and win the race, basically, is what I'm trying to do with this deck. Now, not every Bravo is playing that way, but this is just my style of playing this hero, because I like playing, a little bit on the risky side, I guess you could say. I don't play as defensive. The only matchup I played super defensive, and it still came down to 1 life to 1 life, was a Viserai matchup. That came down to if he dealt me an arcane that I couldn't block, I would die, and if I got a dominated attack of any sort off, he would just lose. So, and that's what ended up happening. I was able to get to the dominate with a giant hand of cards to do whatever I wanted to do. So I did like a Oaken, I think, for dominated at the end of the game. But anyway, let's look at the matchups. I did put them in my comment section. So round 1, I saw some decks that I really wasn't expecting to see at all, honestly. I saw more than 1 Bolton, which was really weird. But so here's the thing: a lot of the Bolton players, from what I could tell, there was 2 Bolton players there. Well, they were both playing Raiden, and their theory on beating Bravo was that, okay, as a warrior, you can run all the defense reactions, right? So you've got Steel Blade Chuck, you've got, as Bolton, you've got the Soul Shield, the light defense reaction, and they thought that was enough to win the game, just on defense reactions. One thing you cannot do with most decks, I think Oldham's probably the only deck that could play defensive and win against Bravo Star of the Show. Any other deck, you're not going to be able to win playing defensive. You're just not going to be able to. At some point, you've got to put enough pressure on my hand, and I have to have a low enough life total to care about the damage, because I will just let you hit me as hard as you want, and then I will hit you back twice as hard, and you can't play the game after that. So keep that in mind if you're playing against like a Bravo Star of the Show. They do not care about damage. They really don't, because they're going to try to deal you as much back. What they care about is holding the combo in their hand. And I think the way you can capitalize on beating a lot of Bravos is play something that has hand disruption. Play like Pummels. Play, Pummel could be played in a lot of different heroes. You could play it in Rhinar. You could play it in a few other decks, such as Guardians, of course, can always play it. So you can play any variation of Guardian and pummel your opponent, and that's probably one of the best ways to get Bravo off of the combo. Round 2, I played Katsu, and I don't know, I played this game very poorly, and that's totally on me. my opponent got paired up because he had lost his first game, so he got paired up, and then he beat me. And I lost because I wasn't aware of all the things the new combos could do. So do your research is a good is a good pro tip. If you haven't played against a Katsu, like the new style Katsu, knowing which attacks to block and which ones not to block is very important. And with the new Katsu, I haven't seen a Katsu since Road to Nationals, so I honestly did not know which attacks I was looking to block outside of like Whelming Gust Wave. Like, yeah, we need to block Whelming Gust Wave so you didn't draw extra cards. I was not familiar with some of the combos in the deck, so he just got to kind of he wanted the damage. I let him do too much damage. Like I said, I like to let people do damage to me so that I can keep my hand and come back harder. Well, he hit over the number that's over the threshold that I wanted him to deal me damage. So, and I was too far gone at that point to recover from it because I have no life gain and things like that. So Katsu, I probably need to play more tanky, and I would have probably won this matchup. But that's okay. So we lost one. So I'm 1-1, and I'm thinking, okay, I gotta win. You know, I gotta try to win out because if I don't win out, I'm probably not gonna make top cut. So round 3, we played against a Prism. Prism is not necessarily the best matchup for Bravo. It's kind of a sketchy one, mostly because the auras. If you let them get out auras and they stay out for too long, they will steamroll you. And you have to be very careful about which auras they put down and which ones you want to let them keep maybe for a turn versus not keeping. So my strategy into Prism is any aura they put out, attack it. And then we're on our normal game plan of trying to trigger Bravo's ability every turn. So we'll talk about the other Prism I played because I played 3 different Prisms. I'll talk about another one I played at the end of the day. But so this matchup, it came down to, it was pretty even in the beginning. We were doing kind of blow for blow in the beginning. And then I got to a point where I was just fusing with Bravo every turn, and he had no way of blocking it. He didn't have defense reactions. He just took a bunch of damage, lost his hand, couldn't play back. So it kind of steamrolled out of control for him. The game just got out of hand. And I didn't let him keep any Spectral Shields. Viserai, this was a very close game. It literally came down to, like I said, 1 life to 1 life. Viserai is a very 50-50 matchup for Starvo. It depends on what combos they get and what cards you get. If you can get like a key Blizzard in, you can ruin their turn sometimes, but they do run enough blues that it might not matter. There was a turn I had a Blizzard in my hand, but I saw my opponent had a hand of all blue, so it didn't matter if I played the Blizzard or not, because he was just going to be able to pay for it. So that game came down 1 life to 1 life. My opponent actually played the Talisman that stops you from drawing cards on his turn. So I had to play around that a little bit. I had to play Art of War just to draw 1 card just to get rid of that. And then once I did that, it turned the whole game around. So once I got into my Art of War and I was able to get rid of that Talisman that was stopping me from drawing cards, I was able to turn the game around and get to a point where, okay, I have an arsenal every turn. I'm going to eventually get a dominated attack off, and you won't be able to stop me. So I hit him. I think I hit him with like an Okanold, and he lost 2 cards, and then he swung back with just the sword. He made like made a rune chant, swung with the sword. So 1 and 2. I blocked it with no rune and Crown of Seeds, a shield, and then when I came back at him, I was doing an Okanold dominated, so he couldn't block it because he had used all his armor at this point. So Viserai, very tough matchup. That was one of my. This was one of the 2 very close games throughout the day. Round 5, we got deck checked. Played against a very nice guy playing Prism. We laughed and had some good time while we were waiting for our decks to get checked. Then we played each other, and I can't say that this was a fair game because I fused probably about 7 or 8 times in a row. The first, other than turn 1, I fused pretty much almost the rest of the game. So he didn't really get to play the game. He didn't have defense reactions to block out, my big attacks that were really disrupting his hand. So he ended up just getting steamrolled, and I even felt bad afterwards because I was just like, man, you didn't even get to play the game, because of Bravo's ability being that powerful. Last round, I played against a Bolton, and like I mentioned, this Bolton specifically mentioned, at the end of our game that he did not think Bravo, star of the show, was consistent enough to pull the ability off, you know, turn after turn after turn. So we played. He ran all the defensive reactions, but whenever he was swinging back at me, he was only swinging back with like the charge attacks for like 3 and 4. So I'm swinging 9, dominate, go again at him. He's swinging 4 at me. So who's gonna win that race at the end of the day? Obviously, I will. I think the life total was something like I don't have it pulled out, but it was like maybe like 18-0. It was not a pretty Bolton game. So I hit the 2 Boltons that were there. This Bolton did make top 8. He got paired against my friend who was also in Starvo, and he kind of had the same result in that Starvo match. He didn't do as well, but he was one of the card guys. He that makes videos on YouTube, so go check those guys out if you want to check them out. And you might be able to see his list that he ran. Lastly, we played Prism in top 8, so we had a break. Played Prism in top 8, and I lost to this Prism. Now, this Prism ran 10 defensive reactions, so we had 4 Fate Foreseen, 4 Sink Belows, a yellow. He had all the Soul Shields. Let's see, so that's 8. He had 9, 10, 11. And then he also ran, I think, a yellow Unmovable. That was the other one. So he ran Unmovable as well. So he ran a crazy suite, or pulled in a crazy suite of defense reactions specifically for my matchup. It came down to the wire. It was 1-1, and I came in with an Oak and I'm like, okay, this may get me somewhere, because like next turn, if I can Bravo ability, I could probably get him on a dominate attack next turn if this Oak hits. Well, the Oak didn't hit, and he dropped a Merciful Retribution on me, which of course dealt me arcane damage, which is where I mentioned earlier I probably need to run the No Rune Boots against Prism. Because when it gets down to that little bit at the end of the game, the while you're on the wire, it's more important to block with the No Rune Boots then it would like I would if I would have had no rune boots. I had a blue in hand and a red, so I could have just pitched my blue and my red to prevent up to 4 of those shields going off, and he only had 4 shields out. So I would have been fine had I played the match correctly. If I would have brought the right equipment. Very good guy though. Had fun playing with him. We were both played a very clean game, so it is what it is. So we made top 8. We got a cold foil Lexi, and as a door prize, I got a cold foil Death Dealer. So I have a few of those now, and got a little bit of cash. And now we get ready for the next one. So, as I mentioned before, things you might want to change with this list. Just looking at it, exposed to the elements is like on the fence card for me. I'm thinking about taking it out and just running 2 pummels where the remembrance and the exposed elements are. Just because Pummel would have closed out a lot of those games, I think, for me a lot easier. There were so many times where I threw out an attack and my opponent was just waiting for the pummel. Like I just threw out a 7 and they were just waiting for the pummel, and they blocked out 7, and then they kind of had a sigh of relief that I didn't have the pummel. So I think pummels is probably going to be something I fit in the list. I may not take these exact cards out, but I'm going to maybe take something out for pummel. I may take like the shock tremors out to put a pummel in, and maybe a main deck card of some sort, and then just main deck pummels. And I also want to get rid of these Polar Blast. Polar Blast is not a very good or impactful card when you're playing. Most people will not pay the 1 if they don't have to, or if they don't think they have to. So I'm probably going to cut Polar Blast and put in Winter's Bite, because at least Winter's Bite forces the 1 pitch. It at least forces the resource from them. Other than that, I don't think... I do like the draw card on Polar Blast, but you're drawing cards off a crown. You're never going to use this effect all that often. I used it once in the entirety of the tournament, so really was not impactful, because all I did was dominate my hammer, which didn't do anything because he had a sink below. So, Polar Blast, probably one of the cards I would cut. And this is just for my build. Like I said, everybody has their own playstyle, so I would say you can take this deck and you can adjust it to your playstyle. If you don't like the whole, Art of War, drawing, trying to fuse as much as possible, then you can play a slower Bravo that doesn't try to fuse every turn. You try to fuse like every other turn, and you just play meaningful attacks. Maybe you play like one less Awakening. You'll play maybe some more impactful non-attack actions in some of these slots. So do your own thing. Don't always net deck, because that's kind of what I say. So do your own thing, and that's what I did with this list. I did my own thing. I didn't net deck. I net decked some of the ideas, or took ideas from other people's decks, but I didn't net deck the deck 100% from somebody else. I took it, played it, didn't like it, and altered it to my own playstyle to make it work for me. So what works for me might not work for you. And with all the Starvos getting in Top Cut, Starvo may not be in Top Cut too much longer. So keep that in mind. May need to try different decks. So, alright. So I'm going to leave it at that. Good luck to everyone with their ProQuest season. And see you at the next one.